What's up, Sooner Nation and Surgeaholic Sooner Surge podcast that tells it like it is. Glad to be back here today. We have a special guest. You guys recognize Bryan Bedford. He's been with us before on a couple of our live shows. CEO of Recruit Route Bedford Agency. Got a lot going on his side of things that he's going to talk about. Thanks for joining us, Bryan. And before we start, talk about what you do, because that's just going to increase the credibility about what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, sure. I'm involved in a couple of different things, but in the purposes of this call, the Bedford Agency is the official NIL education and college recruiting partner for the OSSAA here in Oklahoma. And so we help guide and direct policy and the rules and do a bunch of trainings for high school coaches and athletic directors and certainly student athletes and parents. And then Recruit Route is our brand that helps work with parents and student athletes to kind of navigate this whole maze of recruiting and NIL and so forth. So between the two of those, you kind of got one's more of a B2B play and one's a little bit more of a B2C play, but they all kind of mesh together and work that way. So yeah, happy to be with you guys again.
Yeah, Bryan, can you just kind of explain to our viewers the executive order yesterday from Kevin Stitt relating to NIL, what that means for all the schools in Oklahoma compared to other states in this kind of era of everything changing with name, image, and likeness?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not, first of all, it's not a new thing that's happening nationally. It's actually been done in multiple other states right now. So, we're not bleeding edge here by any stretch of imagination. We're doing something that's pretty consistent. I think that it's a little bit of a defensive move to protect the universities and the student athletes here because, there's a lot of conversations around the future governance of the NCAA and what that will look like and where the control points happen around that. And so I think that this was done with that and a couple other things in mind. The other would be just like this landscape is changing pretty dramatically, and so rules are evolving, and so they know, they're also anticipating kind of where the hockey puck's going to go as far as like what this is ultimately going to look like, and so this just allows them to have some of the flexibility to do that. It also removes some laws that are on the books that could potentially hamper them depending on which way some of this goes. Like the ability for a direct payment to a student athlete, well, that's like legally prohibited today, and they're not really set up to do that. That's one element of this executive order. It's not the only thing, but like that as an example, if they want to do that, or if the NCAA says that that is allowable, or if they move to some sort of an employment model, they would have to have this in place at some point anyways. So I think, all you're seeing is just really good kind of business diligence. Think about like, you got to do research on a car you're going to buy, or do research on a house you're going to buy, or an insurance policy. This for them is just trying to help clean and clear the pathways depending on where the market goes. Now, again, it's kind of like guessing. There's a bit of a choose your own adventure here on where exactly that hockey puck is going to land. But, you don't want to wait and then it lands and then you haven't done anything to set yourself up for it. So, this is just good, healthy, proactive business here to be engaged. This should not like trip off any alarm bells. It shouldn't be, thinking about, things that are going to happen like for the 2025 recruits or the 26 recruits. I mean, we don't know yet. All this is basically allowing, take out some things that were in place as potential roadblocks, smoothing those out to make it easier for them to do that. And then also giving them a little bit of air cover depending on where some of this stuff goes. So that's kind of the way I interpret it, Hunter. It's just good business, just good work ahead, kind of like in school, work ahead a little bit. I know you don't do that very often, but like every once in a while you got to work ahead. These guys are just working ahead a little bit. That's the way to interpret that if I was a fan.
Yeah, and kind of some clarification, because I know we got quite a bit of questions last night about all of this and what it means from what you just said. So they're not technically allowed to do it until the NCAA says they are. It's just a precursor to set up. So
do what? Like do what? Like what's the what are they doing?
Pay the players from the university. The university direct payments.
So today that's not the way that the market works today. But again, they're trying to anticipate, does that change? And if you think about it, in the summer of 2021, I mean, they made the announcement that NIL was a thing, and 2 or 3 days later, it went into effect. And so they had to like literally pivot. I think what they've seen is we need to be ahead of the game. We got to work ahead. We got to do some homework ahead of the game. That's all they're doing, is trying to get ahead of this. And then if policy goes into effect next week or next year or 2 years from now or this summer or anything in between, they've got a road that they can drive the car down. That's what they're looking for.
So as far as competitive advantage necessarily, and you talked about this is already in place in several states. Like how many states have this? And I heard you say it's really removing the roadblocks. So that's the main thing, right? Removing some of those hindrances. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know the answer by state. I mean, I probably could do a little bit of Google research here, but won't do that on the fly today. There's several. You see this in several states. Missouri, each state does a little differently on how they've done that. So it's several. I don't know that it's dozens, but I'd say it's a healthy handful of states that have already done this. So they're probably in the first 10% of the market, which is good, 10 or 15% of the market. So that people should look at that and say, good, our staff at OU and Oklahoma State and Tulsa and so forth, they're really trying to think creatively and proactively, and they're trying to, again, you want your leaders to be guessing, or not guessing, but anticipating moves in the future. And that's what they're doing here. So I think it's wise. Again, I wouldn't overreact to, oh, okay, well now a certain coach he's got the bag, because I know that's kind of the language that a fan would say. Don't jump to that. They don't know exactly. Again, I go back to the basics here of you've got there's probably a couple of different things. The other bit of this and why they have to do this also is that assuming the House settlement passes in the spring, which I don't think that's 100%. There's a lot of issues with it. It's not perfect. It'll have a lot of legislation potentially behind it, but let's just assume that, which again, they have to, that goes into effect in April. We're in January, like that's not very far along. You've got to be anticipating it. And so what happens is that's revenue sharing. We've moved into a different element of this. And so again, you think of NIL into two pieces. You're going to have a revenue share component, which is the $20.5 million cap that will get, university, assuming they opt in, can divvy that up. Probably 85 to 90% of that will go to football, and then the rest will go to some basketball and then some other sports and, so forth. But then you have the what most people call real NIL above that, right? Which is where the collective and, individual deal. So for the revenue share, depending on how they do it, they may end up having to pay the players directly off the revenue share. They don't know yet, but like they're anticipating, like with just the base revenue share, we may end up having to pay them directly. So we need to just get the legislation done. So if it goes that direction, they've got the ability to do that. So again, they're just protecting themselves depending on which way this goes and depending on how the processes work for all this stuff. So I think you'll see most every state will go down a similar path.
Yeah. You just talked about some of the future stuff with the proposed regulations. July 1st, 2021, the NIL came on board, and now there's new proposals that are coming up this next year. You used the analogy of the hockey puck and where it's going. If you and you have a lot more foreknowledge on this than a lot of people. So give us maybe where do you think what are some other things that you think are possibilities and when I say near future, I use that very loosely because things don't always happen very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I think there's probably a couple things that people are in the industry that are watching really closely. The first is, maybe not first, but like one of the first things that people are watching is, does the House settlement in its current construct get approved? Which it impacts revenue sharing, the historical payments of former players for the last till 2016 on back pay. It includes the rev share. It includes roster caps. That's kind of like the first thing that they got to kind of sort out. The second piece is then, which, with the new president coming on board, I think this will get figured out is, are they going to create a exemption or are they going to deem them employees as student athletes? And I think most people, the conservative group would say most people believe that the new administration going in will kind of try to see if they can sort out like an exemption for student athletes. That's part of why some of this got kicked down the road a little bit because they knew they were going to have a new government coming in and to set policy on that. So that's a big one because, if they're employees, there's a lot of different things that have to go with it. I'm not suggesting that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's just going to be different. If they get an exemption, it would be one of the largest, class exemptions of people in the history of the United States. We're talking tens of thousands of student athletes at all different levels. So it's quite significant and would be pretty radical if they were to get the exemption. So it's kind of like a 50-50 that's definitely a jump ball right now. And nobody knows exactly how that's going to kind of go and work and so forth. So yeah, those two things have got to get kind of sorted out. It's everyone's best guess of what that looks like, but it impacts a whole bunch of things. Those two things, because it impacts high school recruiting, the portal, and then the third thing is just like the whole calendar's got to get changed. I think you're going to see a pretty radical change in the next 2 years on just when certain things happen during the year. Like I think spring football is going to change. I think the timing of spring football is going to change. It's going to have to. I think the timing of the portal is going to change. It's almost going to have to. I think, spring recruiting and summer camps, that stuff is going to change. We may move up the height. I'm a proponent of moving the college football calendar up a week, because then it would better align to the New Year's kind of window of when that's kind of like always been the historical thing. But, you got a lot of money involved. You got TV. There's a bunch of different things going on there. So, those three things are like enormous. They're enormous all into themselves. So I wish I was in that room making some of those decisions. But there's pros and cons. There's not easy decisions. Everything has a pro and con with it for sure.
Yeah, that's some great stuff, Bryan. I know one thing, when you explain it, there's much more chance that people are going to understand it than when I say something about it.
Well,
I am not
I just try to make it simple and talk in a normal language that is like, relatable, and because it can get complicated. I also think people like college sports because it is kind of complicated and quirky. I think the quirkiness is kind of what attracts a lot of people. But, as you go into some of this stuff, it really becomes much more business oriented. It's got to be tighter than it is today, and it will. You're watching a business go from like startup into like maturity, and it's just going to take some time. It'll get there.
Speaking of something that's coming on in the future, you do have a summit that's coming up. Is it January 27th? I'd like for you to talk about that. I think it's in the Oklahoma area, correct? Just talk about that before we get off here. Promote that for us.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll send you guys a link if you want to add it in the show notes. It'd be great. We are hosting really the first of its kind NIL and high school NIL and college recruiting summit on Monday, January the 27th in the Oklahoma City metro area. It's down in Moore, the city of Moore, at the station, which is their aquatics and event center, about a half a mile off I-35. Super easy to get to. If you get kids under 15, they've probably been to the station anyways in Oklahoma City, but really cool place. And we can host, we've probably got 25 or 30 people that have already registered, and we're going to try to fill that place up. We've got some guest speakers that are coming in, some of the brightest minds around NIL in the high school and college market. We'll have some people from finance to talk about how do you, think about, now that you're making money, what do you do with it and so forth. We may have some student athletes that are recently recruited to schools that wear red and white. I'll leave it at that for today. So we've got some cool stuff planned. We're still kind of formalizing agenda and some of the guest speakers, and we should announce that. But it's easy to register. You can find it on Eventbrite and just look up high school NIL and college recruiting summit. You can email us at the Bedford Agency at gmail.com. Or just follow us on Twitter or follow me on Twitter. And then I'll get Hunter, you and Jeremy, the link. You guys can add it into the show notes. It's simple. It's free, totally free, 6:30 to 8:30 on the 27th of January. So should be fun. It's perfect for, if you're a fan, if you are a business, if you are a coach, an AD, and you want to learn about what's happening and what's changing, this is a great event. So it's open to the public. It's a great place for just people to learn about what's going on, what you can do in your community with high school kids or, a club team, what's changing around recruiting, because that's changing. So those two topics are going to be at the heart of it. And we just want to give back and make it accessible to people and to learn about what's going on with all this stuff changing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hunter will drop all of Bryan's information and the links to this video. And if you're an athlete or you're a parent of an athlete or a friend of an athlete, January 27th sounds like the place you need to be. You need to be at a summit that they're hosting. Bryan, thanks again for joining us, giving some insight, some great insight, some clarification on all the things coming down the pike. We appreciate it. And Happy New Year to you, and excited for things that you got going on, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. You guys be good. And my favorite Sooner Surge pod. I always love being on here with you guys. So thanks a bunch.